I was staring at a display of organic oatmeal in the middle of Target when a tiny hand tugged at the hem of my trench coat. I looked down, expecting to see a lost child looking for his mother. Instead, I saw a little boy, no older than 4, with deep brown eyes that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. They were my brother's eyes. The brother who died 3 years ago and supposedly never had any children, Michael. The boy whispered, his voice trembling as he clutched my leg. "Daddy said you would find me one day." Before I could even process the shock, the boy reached into the pocket of his denim overalls and pulled out a crumpled photograph. He pressed it into my palm. I stared at the glossy paper, and the sterile fluorescent lights of the supermarket seemed to blur around me. It was a picture of my late brother Michael. He was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile I hadn't seen on his face since we were teenagers. And he was holding this exact little boy as a newborn. But it wasn't just the photograph that shattered my reality into a million jagged pieces. As the boy looked up at me, a heavy silver chain slipped out from beneath his collar. Dangling from that chain was a teardrop-shaped jade pendant. I knew that necklace. Every person in our family knew that necklace. It was the antique jade pendant my mother Vivian swore was stolen off Michael's body the night he died in the hospital. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything. I dropped to my knees right there in aisle 7, my hands shaking as I reached out to touch the cool green stone. My mind violently flashed back to the night Michael passed away. I remembered standing in the stark white hospital corridor, listening to my mother wail and scream at the nursing staff. She had put on a theatrical performance of grief, threatening to sue the entire hospital board, claiming some heartless nurse had ripped the family heirloom from her dead son's neck. When I, being a forensic accountant who always looked for logical explanations, gently suggested we check his personal effects bag again, she had slapped me across the face. She had called me a cold, calculating embarrassment who cared more about accounting procedures than her own brother's soul. Yet here was that very same stolen necklace resting perfectly against the chest of a child who shared my brother's face. "Who gave this to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Before the boy could answer, a woman scrambled around the corner of the aisle, her breathing ragged and panicked. She was a beautiful black woman, perhaps a few years younger than my 34 years, but she looked exhausted. Her clothes were rumpled, and as she rushed closer, I noticed a dark, blooming bruise covering her left cheekbone. "Leo, get away from her," the woman hissed, grabbing the boy by the arm and pulling him behind her. She looked at me with wild, terrified eyes, like a cornered animal ready to fight for her life. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my forensic training kicking in, keeping my tone steady and analytical, despite the hurricane of confusion inside me. "He called me Aunt Emily. He has a picture of my dead brother, and he's wearing a necklace my mother claims was stolen 3 years ago. You need to tell me exactly who you are right now." The woman froze, her defensive posture faltering as she truly looked at my face. Recognition dawned in her eyes, replacing some of the panic with a desperate kind of relief. "You're Emily," she said, her voice shaking. "The numbers girl, the one they threw away." I flinched. The numbers girl. That was my mother's favorite derogatory term for my career. While my mother Vivian prided herself on her status in the African American high society of Atlanta, hosting lavish church galas and demanding perfection, I had committed the ultimate sin. I had dropped out of law school to become a forensic accountant. I traded the prestigious courtroom for a life of auditing corporate fraud and tracking hidden assets. To my mother, I was nothing but a lowly bookkeeper, a stain on our family's flawless image. She much preferred my younger sister Chloe, the beautiful superficial socialite, and Chloe's white husband Brent, a man who supposedly ran a massive logistics empire and brought the kind of country club status my mother craved. "Michael told me about you," the woman continued, pulling her son closer to her legs. "My name is Maya. Michael said you were the scapegoat of the family. He said they treated you like dirt because you refused to play their sick, hypocritical games. But he also said you were the only one with a real moral compass. He said if anything ever happened to him, you were the only one I could trust." If anything ever happened to him, I repeated, my accounting mind latching on to the phrasing. Maya Michael died of a sudden heart attack. That's what the autopsy said. That's what my mother and Brent told everyone. Maya let out a bitter, humorless laugh that sounded more like a sob. A heart attack. Is that the lie they sold you? She looked around the aisle nervously, her eyes darting toward the security cameras. They're hunting us, Emily. They cut off the secret trust fund Michael set up for Leo. They sent men to my apartment last night. They told me I either sign papers giving up all my parental rights to Leo, or they'll make sure I get deported, arrested, or worse. They said they'll wipe us off the face of the earth. None of this made any sense. According to the narrative, my family aggressively pushed Michael had died practically penniless. My mother and Brent had made a huge show of paying for his funeral, constantly reminding our church community of their incredible generosity in covering the debts Michael supposedly left behind. They painted him as a tragic, irresponsible golden boy who lost his way. If Michael was broke, what trust fund was Maya talking about? And why would my family care about a hidden child they never acknowledged? Who is hunting you? I demanded, stepping closer to her. Give me a name, Maya. I track money and criminals for a living. If someone is threatening you, I can dismantle their life by tomorrow morning. Just give me a name. Maya opened her mouth to speak, but a harsh electronic ringing pierced the air. The sound came from the deep pocket of Maya's worn jacket. She flinched, as if she had been physically struck, her hands trembling so violently she could barely retrieve the device. When she finally pulled the phone out, the bright screen illuminated the fear etched into her bruised face. I looked down at the caller ID, expecting to see an unknown number, a hired thug, or perhaps a collection agency. Instead, the name flashing across the screen made the breath completely leave my lungs. It was Brent, my arrogant, supposedly elite, white brother-in-law. The man who drove a Porsche, wore custom Italian suits, and looked down on me at every family Thanksgiving. The man my mother practically worshipped for elevating our family's social standing. "Why is Chloe's husband calling you?" I asked, the pieces of a massive, sinister puzzle beginning to form in my mind. Maya stared at the ringing phone, a tear finally spilling over her bruised cheek. "Because he's the one who took everything," she whispered, "and he's the one who will kill us if he finds out I kept the necklace." The phone continued to vibrate in her hand, a relentless demand from a man who thought he controlled the world. I reached out, took the phone from Maya's shaking fingers, and silenced the call. A dangerous, icy calm settled over my entire body. My family had spent my entire life making me feel small, treating my career as a joke, and demanding absolute obedience to their toxic facade. They thought I was just a disappointment. They had no idea they had just handed a forensic accountant the thread that would unravel their entire empire. I dropped the ringing phone into my purse and grabbed Maya by the arm. I didn't ask if she wanted to come. I told her we were leaving right now. I knew exactly where my family was because Vivian never deviated from her Sunday schedule. Every week right after church, my mother held court at the most exclusive African-American country club in Atlanta. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could flaunt her perfect daughter Chloe and her wealthy white son-in-law Brent to all the other high society matriarchs. I marched through the heavy oak doors of the club, ignoring the maitre d' who tried to tell me the dining room was reserved for members. I kept a firm grip on Maya's hand while she held tightly to little Leo. The dining room was a sea of pastel Sunday dresses, pearl necklaces, and tailored suits. And right in the center, seated at the best table by the floor-to-ceiling windows, was my family. Vivian was sipping a mimosa, her hair perfectly coiffed. Chloe was laughing at something Brent had just said, her designer purse resting on an empty chair. I walked straight up to their table and slammed the crumpled photograph of Michael and Leo right down onto the pristine white tablecloth, knocking over a crystal water glass. The glass shattered. The entire dining room went dead silent. Vivian jumped back, her eyes darting frantically around the room to see who was watching before she even looked at the photo. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom as she glared up at me. "Are you out of your mind?" Vivian hissed, her voice a sharp, furious whisper, meant to preserve her precious image. "Are you coming in here to humiliate me again? Just like the day you tore up your law school acceptance letter in front of the entire congregation to go work as a lowly bookkeeper? I told you to never bring your chaotic energy around my friends." I didn't blink. I pointed a steady finger at the little boy hiding behind Maya's legs. "Look at the photo, Mother." I demanded, my voice carrying across the silent dining room. "Look at the boy, and then tell me how the jade pendant you swore was stolen from Michael on his deathbed ended up around the neck of his hidden son." That Vivian finally looked down at the photograph. The color drained from her face entirely. For a split second, I saw genuine panic flash in her eyes, but she instantly replaced it with a look of utter disgust. She looked at Maya, taking in her bruised face and rumpled clothes, and sneered. "Get this street trash out of my club," Vivian commanded, gripping the edge of the table. "You bring some random woman and her bastard child in here to disrupt my family lunch. Michael is dead. He died with nothing. Get them out before I have security drag you all out by your hair." Before I could respond, Brent pushed his chair back and stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his custom Italian suit, looking at me with the unbearable condescending smirk he always wore. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold money clip, and peeled off 5 $100 bills. He threw them onto the floor right at Maya's feet. "Pick it up, Emily," Brent said, his tone dripping with arrogant authority. "Take the money, buy this woman a bus ticket back to whatever shelter she crawled out of, and leave my family alone. Michael died drowning in debt. We had to pay for his funeral. He has no kids, and he certainly has no money for you to try and extort from us. Now take the cash and get lost." I looked down at the money on the floor, then slowly moved my gaze up to Brent. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My training as a forensic accountant had taught me that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. "I'm not going to pick up your dirty money, Brent," I said, my voice completely flat. "But I am going to ask you a question. That's a beautiful watch you're wearing. A Patek Philippe Nautilus. Retail value is roughly $80,000. Brent froze his hand, instinctively dropping to cover his wrist. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting between me and her husband. "You bought that watch exactly 2 days after my brother's heart stopped beating." I continued, taking a step closer to him. I always wondered how a man whose logistics company was supposedly restructuring could afford such a luxury during a family tragedy. But now I know. You bought it using Michael's corporate credit card, a card that was supposed to be deactivated. You sit here calling my brother a failure who died in debt, but you've been draining his hidden accounts for 3 years. Brent's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. His elite, composed facade cracked, revealing the panicked fraudster underneath. He slammed his fist on the table, leaning into my face. "You think you're so smart because you play with spreadsheets all day?" Brent snarled. "You're nothing. You live in a tiny apartment and you survive on the family credit card your mother lets you keep out of pity. You want to play games? Let's play." He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number on speakerphone. It was the private wealth management line from my mother's bank. Vivian watched him with a proud, vindictive smile, completely supportive of her son-in-law, humiliating her own daughter. "Yes, this is Brent Holden, an authorized user on the Vivian Brooks family account," Brent said into the phone, maintaining direct eye contact with me. "I need you to immediately cancel the secondary card ending in 4102. Yes, reported as stolen. Deactivate it permanently." He ended the call and tossed his phone back onto the table. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "There goes your grocery money, Emily," Chloe sneered, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "You always were a jealous, bitter loser. You could never stand that Mom loved me more, that I married a successful man while you sit alone in a cubicle. Pick up the $500 on the floor. It's the only cash you're going to see this month. Go back to your basement and leave us alone." They looked at me, waiting for the tears. They were waiting for the breakdown, the apology, the moment I would inevitably beg for forgiveness, just to keep my access to the family's good graces. They thought cutting off my access to a bank account I hadn't touched in 5 years was a fatal blow. I didn't shed a single tear. I just smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made Vivian shift uneasily in her chair. I reached into my own purse and pulled out my phone. I bypassed my personal contacts and opened my encrypted work directory. As a senior forensic auditor for one of the top financial investigation firms in the country, I had direct lines that Brent couldn't even fathom. I dialed my firm's compliance director. The call connected on the first ring. "David, it's Emily," I said, keeping my eyes locked dead on Brent. "I need you to trigger a suspicious activity report on Holden Logistics. Yes, the entire corporate umbrella. Cross-reference their offshore wire transfers with the routing numbers I flagged last month. I want them placed on the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network watch list immediately. Flag all incoming and outgoing assets for suspected embezzlement and money laundering." Brent's smug expression vanished completely. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He knew exactly what that watch list meant. It meant his accounts would be frozen. It meant his investors would be notified. It meant his entire house of cards was about to collapse. "What the hell are you doing?" Brent demanded, his voice cracking with sudden panic as he reached across the table trying to grab my phone. I stepped back out of his reach and ended the call, slipping the phone back into my purse. "You canceled a credit card I haven't used since the day I moved out, Brent," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "I just locked down your entire corporate banking infrastructure. By tomorrow morning, every vendor you owe money to will get a notification that your assets are under federal investigation. You cut off my fake allowance. I just cut off your oxygen." Vivian stood up, her chest heaving with outrage, but I didn't give her a chance to speak. I grabbed Maya's hand again. "Enjoy your brunch," I said to my mother. "It's the last meal Brent is going to be able to pay for." Brent stared at me, his chest heaving under his tailored Italian suit. The utter silence of the country club dining room was deafening. The surrounding wealthy patrons had stopped pretending to eat and were openly staring at our table. The arrogant smirk that Brent constantly wore had completely vanished, replaced by a flash of raw, unfiltered panic. He glanced down at the heavy gold Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, as if the metal had suddenly turned red hot and burned his skin. He knew I had caught him. He knew I possessed the exact dates, the exact transaction numbers, and the exact undeniable truth of his theft. But men like Brent, men who built their entire identities on stolen wealth and fragile egos, never surrendered gracefully. They always tried to crush the person holding the mirror. His panic rapidly morphed into explosive, uncontrollable rage. He snatched his smartphone from the pristine white tablecloth, his fingers jabbing violently at the screen. He bypassed the standard customer service numbers and dialed the direct priority line for the private wealth management firm that handled the entire Brooks family portfolio. He aggressively slammed the phone down in the center of the table and pressed the speaker button, ensuring his voice would echo across the dining room for maximum humiliation. A polished professional voice answered immediately, greeting him by name. "This is Brent Holden," he barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am an authorized director on the Vivian Brooks Family Trust accounts. I need you to immediately execute a total freeze on the secondary platinum card ending in 4102. Yes, right this second. The cardholder is cut off from all family assets, effective immediately. Decline any pending transactions, cancel the line of credit, and flag the card as unauthorized. Lock her out completely." He ended the call with a vicious swipe of his finger, breathing heavily. His chest puffed out in a desperate display of dominance. He looked up at me, expecting to see terror. He expected to see the rebellious daughter finally broken, begging for access to the very lifeline she needed to survive. For my entire life, my mother Vivian had weaponized money. She used financial support as a psychological leash to control her children. 5 years ago, when I moved out to escape her toxic household, she had practically forced that platinum credit card into my hands. She claimed it was for emergencies, a motherly gesture of care, but the reality was far more sinister. Vivian used the monthly statements as a tracking device. She monitored every grocery store I visited, scrutinized the modest restaurants I frequented, and used those purchases to mock my lifestyle at every family gathering. It was a digital tether designed to remind me that I was never truly independent, that I was always just one frozen account away from absolute ruin. Chloe clapped her hands together, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the heavy tension in the air. She leaned forward, sipping her mimosa, acting like a victorious queen looking down at a peasant. "Well, there it is," Chloe sneered, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Are you happy now, Emily? You marched in here trying to play the hero for some random street woman and her little brat, and all you managed to do was bankrupt yourself in under 5 minutes. That's exactly what happens when you turn against your own blood. You have always been a bitter, jealous loser. You could never stand the fact that Mom loved me more, that I married a man who actually built a massive logistics empire while you sit in a tiny, depressing cubicle crunching numbers for a living. Chloe stood up, pointing a manicured finger at Maya, who was holding Leo tightly against her legs. "Look at you," Chloe continued, her voice dripping with classist disgust. "You have absolutely nothing. You don't even own a car that runs properly. How are you going to pay your rent tomorrow? Are you going to move this pathetic woman and her kid into your miserable little basement apartment?" "Pick up those $100 bills Brent threw on the floor. It's the only cash you're going to see this month. Grab the money, crawl back to your basement, and leave us alone." Vivian smoothed her napkin, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. "Your sister is entirely correct. You brought this disaster entirely on yourself. I kept that account open out of the goodness of my heart because I pitied your pathetic life choices. But you are profoundly ungrateful. You always have been. Now you can walk out of my club, take your little charity cases with you, and figure out how to survive in the real world without our protection." I looked at the three of them. They were practically glowing with malicious satisfaction. They honestly believed they had just delivered a fatal, devastating blow. They operated under the delusion that money was the only currency of power, and because they supposedly controlled the family accounts, they controlled my destiny. I didn't yell. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't drop to my knees to gather the scattered bills on the floor. Instead, I let out a slow, chilling laugh, a genuine sound of amusement that made Vivian shift uneasily in her chair and caused the triumphant smirk to waver on Chloe's face. I reached into my structured leather tote bag and pulled out my wallet. I slid the heavy metal platinum card out of its slot. I held it up between my index and middle fingers, so the sunlight streaming through the windows caught the embossed family name, making it visible to everyone at the table. I didn't raise my voice, but my words cut through the room like shattered glass. "You truly believe I've been living off your toxic pity?" I asked, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with my mother. "You actually think I would ever allow you to hold financial leverage over me after I spent my entire life watching you use money to manipulate and suffocate Michael?" I gripped the edges of the thick plastic and metal composite card. With a single forceful motion, I applied pressure. The card snapped cleanly in half with a sharp, violent crack. I dropped the two severed pieces directly into Chloe's half-empty mimosa glass. The champagne hissed and bubbled as the pieces sank heavily to the bottom. "I haven't charged a single solitary penny to that account in 5 long years," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "I kept it active so you would feel secure in your delusion of control. I kept it active so you would be far too busy monitoring my decoy coffee purchases to look into what I was actually doing behind the scenes. I pay my own rent. I bought my own house last year completely in cash. I don't need your dirty money, and I certainly don't need your permission to exist." Brent scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest in a feeble attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Big words for a glorified low-level bookkeeper. You have nothing but a loud mouth." I ignored him completely. I pulled my own smartphone from my pocket. I didn't use the speakerphone, but in the dead silence of the dining room, my steady voice carried perfectly. I dialed David, the managing partner of my forensic accounting firm, the man who had trained me to hunt down white-collar criminals with ruthless surgical precision. The call connected instantly. "David, it's Emily," I said, keeping my eyes locked dead on Brent's face. "Execute Directive 4 immediately. Yes, the entire Holden Logistics portfolio. Upload the compiled financial dossier directly to the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network database. Flag all personal and commercial accounts connected to Brent Holden for immediate review. Make sure you attach the digital proof of the $80,000 wire transfer made from Michael's corporate account exactly 48 hours after his death." I lowered the phone and slid it back into my pocket. I watched as the remaining color completely drained from Brent's face. The smug arrogance was obliterated, replaced by a chalky, sickly pallor. His eyes widened with a profound terror he could no longer mask behind his expensive suit. He knew exactly what those words meant. "You see, Brent," I said, leaning over the table so he could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "My firm has been building a comprehensive federal case on your fake logistics company for 6 solid months. We know about the offshore shadow accounts in the Cayman Islands. We know about the shell companies you meticulously used to funnel money out of my brother's startup. And as of 10 seconds ago, the federal government knows about every single one of them too. I stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with Maya. "You're officially on the Federal Financial Crimes Watch list." I continued delivering the final devastating blow. "Your accounts are frozen. Your assets are locked. Your major investors are receiving notifications from federal agents right at this very moment. You just proudly canceled a credit card I never used. But I just permanently cut off your entire lifeline. Enjoy your brunch. It's the last meal you'll ever be able to pay for." The fallout from the country club was immediate, but I didn't have time to sit around and wait for Brent to panic. I had a promise to keep to my dead brother, and I had an empire of lies to dismantle. That evening, my sister Chloe was hosting her premiere art exhibition at a high-end gallery in downtown Atlanta. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of her fake career as a visionary artist funded entirely by the people she manipulated. I arrived at the gallery just after 8 o'clock. I didn't wear the sensible, drab suits my mother always claimed were the only thing suitable for a woman of my plain appearance. I wore a tailored emerald green gown that commanded attention the second I walked through the double glass doors, and I didn't walk in alone. Maya walked right beside me. We had spent the afternoon getting her cleaned up. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair beautifully styled, the bruise on her cheekbone expertly concealed by makeup. She looked radiant strong and ready to face the family that had tried to erase her and her son from existence. The gallery was packed with Atlanta's elite. Waiters circled the room with silver trays of champagne. Local politicians, wealthy investors, and members of my mother's church board were mingling around Chloe's oversized, aggressively colorful, abstract paintings. Chloe was holding court near the center of the room, wearing a pristine white silk Dior dress, soaking up the praise like a sponge. Then she saw me. The fake practice smile vanished from Chloe's face. Her eyes locked onto Maya, and I watched the realization hit her. She knew exactly who Maya was. Brent must have called her in a blind panic after our brunch encounter. Chloe grabbed a full glass of red wine from a passing waiter and marched straight toward us, her heels clicking furiously against the polished concrete floor. "You psychotic, jealous loser," Chloe hissed, her voice rising above the soft jazz music playing in the background. "You just had to come here and ruin my night. You've always been obsessed with destroying me because you can't stand that I have the life you never will. You're nothing but a bitter accountant who nobody loves." She raised the glass, her hand shaking with rage, and threw the dark red wine directly at my face. But growing up in the Brooks household meant you learned to anticipate erratic, violent behavior. I didn't even blink. I simply took one fluid step to the left. The wine sailed right past me. But Chloe had thrown it with such force that her momentum carried her forward. She slammed directly into a waiter, walking behind me carrying a massive tray of drinks. The collision was spectacular. The tray tipped, and a dozen glasses of red wine and sticky champagne cascaded downward, pouring entirely over Chloe. The dark liquid instantly stained her expensive white Dior dress, soaking it through and leaving her looking like a dripping, humiliated mess. The entire gallery gasped. The jazz music seemed to fade away as dozens of wealthy patrons turned to stare at the socialite, standing in a puddle of ruined alcohol and shattered glass. Chloe shrieked, looking down at her ruined dress in absolute horror. "You did that on purpose!" she screamed, pointing a trembling, wine-stained finger at me. "Someone call security and get this trash out of my gallery right now." I ignored her screaming. I calmly stepped around the puddle of glass and walked straight toward the centerpiece of the entire exhibition. It was a massive, chaotic canvas hanging on the back wall, illuminated by a spotlight. Next to the painting was a small gold plaque with a bright red sticker indicating it had already been purchased. I turned to face the crowd, raising my voice just enough to carry across the silent, staring room. "It's absolutely fascinating how your art career suddenly skyrocketed 3 years ago. Chloe," I said, my voice echoing off the gallery walls, "right around the exact time our brother Michael died." Brent came rushing through the crowd, his face sweating profusely, looking like a man who was moments away from a massive heart attack. He grabbed Chloe by the arm, trying to pull her away, but she was too busy glaring at me to move. I stepped closer to the gold plaque and tapped it with my fingernail. "This piece sold tonight to an anonymous collector for $150,000, I announced to the room. A remarkable achievement for a self-taught artist. But as a forensic auditor, I have a natural curiosity about anonymous wealth, so I pulled the gallery transaction records an hour ago. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded printout, holding it up for the closest guests to see. Several members of my mother's church board were standing just a few feet away, their expressions shifting from confusion to deep concern. The routing number used to purchase this painting, I continued, my voice steady and lethal, is registered to the Grace Fellowship Community Outreach Fund, the exact same church charity fund that our mother, Vivian Brooks, manages. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The church board members exchanged horrified glances. I looked directly at my sister, whose mouth was opening and closing, with no sound coming out. "Did you honestly think nobody would notice Chloe?" I asked, dropping the volume of my voice so the absolute disdain was clear. "Did you think I wouldn't trace the money? You're not a successful artist. You're buying your own mediocre paintings using church charity money to launder the cash your husband embezzled from our dead brother's company. You are a fraud, and your entire life is funded by theft." The silence in the gallery was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Brent was aggressively whispering into his phone, likely calling his lawyers, while the church investors began aggressively questioning the gallery manager. I had just detonated a financial bomb in the middle of their perfect high society world, and the blast radius was inescapable. I turned to Maya, giving her a reassuring nod. We had done what we came to do. It was time to leave them to the wreckage. But before I could take a single step toward the exit, the crowd violently parted. Vivian stormed through the guests, her face contorted into a mask of unprecedented fury. She didn't yell. She didn't offer a polished excuse to her wealthy friends. She lunged forward with terrifying speed, raising her hand high in the air. The sound of the slap cracked like a gunshot across the silent gallery. The sharp sting radiated across my left cheek, instantly followed by the metallic taste of blood pooling in the corner of my mouth. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the impact. Maya gasped and immediately lunged forward to intervene, her hands reaching out to shield me, but I swiftly held up my right arm, flattening my palm to stop her. I didn't want anyone else fighting my battles. The gallery, which had been buzzing with the scandalized whispers of Atlanta's elite just seconds prior, fell into a suffocating graveyard silence. Vivian stood breathing heavily, her diamond bracelets clinking against her wrist as her hand dropped back to her side. But my mother was a master manipulator, and she knew the optics of what she had just done were terrible. So, right in front of the horrified church board members and the wealthy investors, she spent her life trying to impress Vivian, executed the most flawless, sickening pivot I had ever witnessed. Her features crumpled, her eyes filled with rapid manufactured tears. She brought a trembling hand to her chest, clutching her pearls as if she were the one who had just been assaulted. "Look at what you've reduced me to!" Vivian cried out, her voice echoing with a perfectly calibrated theatrical sob. She turned to the crowd, casting her gaze toward the wealthiest patrons in the room, playing the tragic victim to perfection. "Please, everyone, you must forgive my daughter. She's sick. She's a deeply troubled, rebellious girl who has spent her entire life trying to tear this family apart out of sheer spite." Chloe, still dripping with red wine and champagne, stepped up beside her mother, nodding vigorously. Brent hovered behind them, his face pale, but clearly relieved that Vivian was taking the heat off his financial crimes. "She's obsessed with ruining us," Vivian sobbed louder, projecting her voice so the church elders could hear every word. She has always been bitterly jealous of Chloe, and she is especially jealous of Brent. She can't stand that her sister married a brilliant, successful white man who actually elevated this family. She resents Brent's talent. She resents his ambition. She is trying to destroy a good man's reputation tonight simply because she is a miserable, lonely accountant who could never land a husband of his caliber. She comes in here to her own sister's beautiful exhibition and fabricates these horrific lies about money laundering just to steal the spotlight. The crowd began to murmur again. A few of the older society ladies nodded in sympathy toward Vivian. Gaslighting was my mother's primary weapon, and she was wielding it with expert precision. She was trying to turn my forensic evidence into the ravings of a hysterical, jealous spinster. I slowly turned my face back to the center of the room. I didn't rub my stinging cheek. I lifted the back of my hand and calmly wiped the smear of blood from my lower lip. I looked at the crimson stain on my skin, and then I looked directly into my mother's fake, tear-filled eyes. I smiled. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a woman who had just watched her enemy walk blindly into an open grave. "You know Mother," I said, my voice carrying a terrifying, icy calm that instantly silenced the murmuring crowd. "This slap feels exactly like the one you gave me 8 years ago. You remember that day, don't you?" Vivian's fake tears hitched. Her eyes widened, the panic returning sharper this time. "Stop talking, Emily," she hissed under her breath. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. I remember it vividly. I continued, making sure every investor, every gallery patron, and every church elder could hear my crisp, clear enunciation. I was 19 years old. I had just opened your desk drawer to find my bank statements, the college tuition savings account that my father had set up for me before he died. The account you were supposed to be guarding. I found out that you had completely drained every single penny of my tuition money. "And do you remember what you used it for, Mother?" "Shut your mouth right now," Brent growled, stepping out from behind. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to intimidate me, but he looked like a terrified child playing dress-up. "You used my education fund to buy Brent a custom Mercedes-Benz as a wedding gift." I stated the words, slicing through the gallery like a scalpel. "You stole your own daughter's future to buy a luxury car for your brilliant, successful white son-in-law because you needed to prove to his wealthy parents that our family had money. And when I confronted you with the bank statements, you slapped me across the face, exact same angle, exact same force, and told me that my duty was to sacrifice for the family's image." A loud gasp erupted from the wife of the church's head pastor. She stared at Vivian with pure horror. "That is a lie!" Vivian shrieked, dropping the weeping mother act completely. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and ugly. "She is a pathological liar. She is making all of this up because she hates us. Brent is a millionaire. He didn't need a car from me. She hacked into our accounts. She is a criminal. Call the police. Arrest her." I let her scream. I let her flail. The more she panicked, the more guilty she looked to the wealthy crowd she so desperately wanted to impress. I didn't raise my voice to match hers. I simply reached into the sleek leather clutch tucked under my arm. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a single sheet of paper tightly sealed inside a clear, laminated protective sleeve. I held the document up by the corner. "You're right about one thing, Mother," I said smoothly. "I do hack into accounts, but I do it legally with federal warrants because it's my job. And speaking of my job, I have one more gift for Chloe's big night." Chloe stumbled backward, her wine-soaked dress clinging to her legs. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling, her eyes fixed on the laminated paper. "This is an emergency asset freeze injunction signed by a federal judge at 4 o'clock this afternoon," I explained, walking directly up to my mother and sister. "Since we have definitively tracked the stolen church charity funds directly into the purchasing accounts of this gallery, every single piece of art in this room is now considered evidence of money laundering and wire fraud." Brent let out a strangled sound, grabbing his hair. "As of midnight tonight," I continued, my eyes locked on Chloe's terrified face, "this entire gallery is being seized by the federal government. Every bank account associated with your name, Chloe, is frozen. Your business license is suspended. The paintings you bought with stolen money will be confiscated as illicit assets. You cannot sell a single canvas. You cannot transfer a single dollar. Your brilliant artistic career is officially over." I stepped right into Vivian's personal space. She was trembling so violently I could hear her earrings rattling. I raised my hand and simply dropped the laminated document against my mother's chest. She was too stunned to catch it. The heavy paper slid down the front of her expensive dress and hit the concrete floor with a soft, final smack. "You should have let me keep my tuition money, Mother." I whispered, my voice meant only for her and Chloe to hear, because a law degree would have been a lot cheaper for you than a forensic accountant with a vendetta. I turned my back on my family without waiting for their response. I linked my arm through Maya's, and together we walked straight through the center of the gallery, The crowd of elite patrons actively parted for us, clearing a wide path toward the exit, staring at my family as if they were a disease. We stepped out into the cool Atlanta night air, leaving Vivian, Chloe, and Brent standing in the center of their shattered, fraudulent world. The cool Atlanta night air hit my face like ice water, instantly clearing the heavy atmosphere of the gallery from my lungs. I kept my arm firmly linked with Maya's, guiding her away from the flashing lights and frantic murmurs of the elite crowd spilling onto the sidewalk. Maya trembled slightly, but she held her head high, carrying little Leo against her chest. We had shattered the illusion, but I knew the cornered animals inside that building would not surrender quietly. We crossed the street toward the VIP parking structure. The concrete garage was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent bulbs casting long, distorted shadows. My black Tesla Model S was parked in a secluded spot on the second level. I reached for my phone to unlock the doors, but a heavy set of footsteps echoed through the quiet garage. "Hold it right there," a harsh voice barked from the shadows. Brent stepped out from behind a massive pillar, blocking our path. He was no longer the polished, arrogant executive. His tie was loosened, his jacket rumpled, and his eyes were wild with the desperate energy of a man watching his empire burn. Flanking him on either side were two imposing security guards, their arms crossed, trying to look intimidating. Maya gasped, instinctively stepping back. I didn't move. I positioned myself in front of her, staring Brent down with unwavering calm. "You think you can destroy my life and just drive off?" Brent snarled, marching closer. "You have no idea what I'm capable of, Emily." "Are you planning to have me assaulted in a public garage, Brent?" I asked. "Because adding a violent crime to your federal money laundering charges seems counterproductive." Brent let out a harsh, manic laugh. "I'm not going to touch you, but I am going to destroy her." He pointed a trembling finger at Maya. "I'm going to sue this street trash for extortion, and with my family's power, I am going to make sure the courts see her as an unfit, manipulative addict. We are going to take that little bastard boy and throw him into an orphanage where he belongs. Leo is going into the foster system, and you will never see him again." Maya let out a muffled sob of pure terror, but my heart rate didn't elevate. Brent was playing right into my hands. "You can't take Leo," I said steadily. "You have no legal standing, no biological connection, and absolutely no rights." "That's where you're wrong, you arrogant bookkeeper," Brent sneered triumphantly. He reached into his jacket and yanked out a folded piece of heavy parchment paper, thrusting it into the air. "This is a legally binding child custody authorization. It was signed by Michael himself right before he died. It explicitly grants full guardianship of his son to my wife and me, declaring the mother unfit. We have the legal right to take him right now." He shoved the paper closer, expecting me to crumble. He forgot one crucial detail. I was a senior forensic auditor. My entire existence revolved around finding the invisible flaws in forged documents. I didn't panic. I pulled out my phone, turned on the bright LED flashlight, and grabbed the edge of the paper. I scanned the text, my eyes jumping past the legalese directly to the signatures and the notary stamp at the bottom of the page. I stared at the blue ink, and then I started to laugh. It was a cold, mocking laugh that echoed loudly against the concrete walls. Brent's smirk wavered. "What's so funny?" he demanded, his voice cracking with sudden uncertainty. I shook my head, shining the flashlight directly into his panicked eyes. "Brent," I whispered, dripping with condescension, "I always knew you were arrogant, but I never realized you were this profoundly, unbelievably stupid." "What are you talking about?" he yelled, trying to snatch the paper back. "Michael died in November of 2023. I stated clearly, tapping my manicured nail against the embossed blue seal. "But you used a notary public whose commission seal is clearly registered and dated for January of 2024. Brent froze. The blood drained from his face. The two security guards exchanged confused, uneasy glances. "You forged a dead man's signature?" I continued, my voice ringing with lethal authority. "And you were so rushed to create this fake custody document that you paid off a notary who didn't even have an active commission at the time of my brother's death. This stupid piece of evidence didn't just fail to scare me, Brent. It just secured you an automatic 5 years in federal prison for document forgery, right on top of the decades you'll serve for embezzlement." Brent stared at the notary seal, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The reality of his colossal mistake crashed down on him. The sheer, overwhelming panic finally shattered his remaining sanity. With a guttural roar of absolute rage, he lunged forward, fists raised, preparing to physically attack me. But he never made contact. As he lunged, my black Tesla sensed the aggressive sudden movement. The car's sentry mode activated instantly. The headlights flared to life with blinding high-beam intensity, bathing Brent and the guards in stark white light. The massive center console screen inside the car lit up, displaying a bright red recording symbol, actively capturing every single second of the altercation through its multiple high-definition dash cameras. Brent stopped dead in his tracks, shielding his eyes from the blinding headlights. "Smile for the federal prosecutors, Brent," I said, pointing to the cameras mounted on the vehicle. "You just committed attempted assault on camera holding a forged legal document." Brent stared at those recording cameras, the fight completely draining out of him. He looked at me then, at the blinding lights, and finally realized it was entirely over. He spun around and sprinted frantically into the darkness of the parking garage, leaving his two confused security guards standing behind him. I unlocked the car, ushering Maya and Leo into the safety of the back seat. Knowing the war was finally won, I pulled the Tesla out of the parking garage and merged onto the bustling Atlanta highway, leaving the flashing lights of Chloe's ruined art exhibition far behind us. The silence inside the car was thick, but it was no longer heavy with fear. It was the quiet, stabilizing calm of a storm that had finally broken. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Maya was holding Leo tightly against her chest, her eyes wide as she watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. She had spent the last 3 years running from the shadow of my family, terrified of the power Vivian and Brent wielded. Tonight, she had watched me dismantle that power in under 10 minutes. "I'm taking you to a secure corporate hotel suite booked under my firm's name," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Brent won't be able to track you there. Tomorrow morning we're going to find out exactly what Michael left behind." Maya shifted in the leather seat, reaching into the small, battered canvas bag she had been carrying all evening. She pulled out a small, black leather-bound notebook. The edges were frayed, and the cover was scuffed. "Michael told me to find you," Maya said, her voice raspy but steady. "He told me that if anything ever happened to him, you were the only person in the Brooks family with a soul. He said you were the only one smart enough to understand the numbers. I tried to come to you right after the funeral, but Brent's security team intercepted me outside my apartment. They took everything I had. They took my phone, my ID, my lease documents, but I managed to hide this." She passed the notebook forward through the gap between the front seats. I took it, resting it on the center console. "Michael said the notebook contained the map." Maya continued, gently stroking Leo's hair as the toddler drifted to sleep against her shoulder. "But he said the map was useless without the key. He was so paranoid during those last few weeks, Emily. He kept looking over his shoulder. He knew Brent was funneling money out of his logistics startup. He knew your mother was helping him cover the tracks. Michael told me he couldn't write the final access code down anywhere. He said paper could be stolen and digital files could be hacked." "So where did he hide the key?" I asked, my forensic instincts immediately kicking into high gear. If a man like my brother, a man methodical enough to build complex corporate structures, needed an uncrackable vault, he would rely on something entirely outside the financial system. Maya looked down at the sleeping boy in her arms and smiled softly. "He hid it in a song." The next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I walked through the towering marble archways of the First Fidelity Depository in downtown Atlanta. It was a private, highly secure vault facility utilized exclusively by high-net-worth individuals and corporate entities. It was not a place Vivian Brooks or Brent Holden even knew existed. I walked straight up to the heavily armored reception desk, flashing my corporate auditing credentials alongside Michael's death certificate and the black leather notebook. The vault manager, a stern man in a tailored gray suit, examined the paperwork with practiced scrutiny. He led Maya, Leo, and me down a quiet, heavily carpeted corridor, through a massive steel biometric door, and into a private viewing room lined with thousands of sleek titanium boxes. "Box 814. the manager said, stopping in front of a specific panel. Your brother paid for a 50-year lease on this deposit box in cash. However, as per his strict security directives, the physical key is only the first step. The box is equipped with a secondary 6-digit voice-activated numeric lock. If the incorrect code is entered 3 times, the box permanently locks down and the contents are incinerated. The manager stepped back, crossing his hands behind his back. You have 3 attempts, Ms. Brooks. I looked at the digital keypad mounted flush against the titanium door. I turned to Maya. She knelt down on the soft carpet, bringing herself eye level with her son. Leo was clutching a small toy car I had bought him that morning, looking around the giant steel room with wide, curious eyes. Leo, sweetheart, Maya whispered, her voice gentle and encouraging. Do you remember the counting song Daddy used to sing to you every night before bed? The one about the spaceships? Leo blinked, dropping his toy car. He looked at the steel boxes, then up at his mother. He gave a small, enthusiastic nod. Can you sing it for Aunt Emily? Maya asked, pointing toward the keypad. Leo took a tiny step forward. He looked directly at the digital microphone embedded in the steel door and opened his mouth. His small, sweet voice echoed in the cold, metallic room. 4 little spaceships flying to the moon, Leo sang, stumbling slightly over the words, but maintaining the exact rhythm his father had taught him. 9 shiny stars shining in my room, 2 little comets flying way up high, 7 big planets in the endless sky, 1 little boy going fast asleep, 1 daddy loving him across the deep. 4, 9, 2, 7, 1, 1. The digital keypad flashed a brilliant solid green. A loud, heavy mechanical click resonated from inside the wall, followed by the smooth hiss of pressurized air releasing. The titanium door popped open. The vault manager nodded respectfully and stepped entirely out of the room, closing the heavy privacy door behind him. I stepped forward and pulled the long, heavy metal drawer out of its housing. I carried it over to the mahogany viewing table in the center of the room. I expected to find a few life insurance policies. I expected to find a modest hidden savings account, perhaps enough to keep Maya and Leo fed and sheltered for a few years. I expected the desperate final acts of a man who had been bled dry by his own toxic family. I opened the lid. There was no cash inside. No, there were no emotional goodbye letters. There was only a single thick stack of legal documents bound in heavy black leather and a secure encrypted silver flash drive. I pulled the documents out and laid them flat on the table. As a senior forensic auditor, I spent my life reading the hidden language of money. I knew how to trace shell corporations, how to unmask dummy accounts, and how to track offshore wires. I flipped open the first page, my eyes scanning the dense legal terminology, moving rapidly down to the asset declaration schedules. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the numbers printed on the page, completely paralyzed. Emily, Maya asked, stepping closer, her voice laced with sudden worry. What is it? What did he leave us? Is it bad? Leave us. I slowly looked up from the paper, staring at Maya with absolute, unadulterated shock. For my entire life, Vivian and Chloe had mocked Michael. They called him a pathetic failure. They humiliated him at every Sunday dinner because his logistics company was supposedly drowning in debt. Brent had paraded around like a conquering king because he managed to embezzle $80,000 from Michael's corporate accounts, thinking he was cleverly picking the meat off a dying carcass. They were all wrong. They were so spectacularly, historically wrong. Michael wasn't bankrupt, I whispered, my voice shaking as I traced my finger over the official Federal Patent Registry documents. His logistics trucking company was a complete decoy. It was a shell operation designed specifically to fail. He built it solely to keep Vivian and Brent distracted while he worked on his real project in secret. I flipped to the second page, pointing to the corporate acquisition contracts. Michael was the anonymous architect of a revolutionary artificial intelligence predictive modeling software, I explained, looking at Maya, who was staring at me in total disbelief. It's an algorithm designed to optimize global shipping routes. He patented the intellectual property under a blind LLC, and exactly 3 months before his heart gave out, he sold the exclusive licensing rights to a multinational tech conglomerate. I turned to the final financial declaration page. The purchase price was $50 million. I stated the words, feeling incredibly heavy in my mouth. Michael died a multimillionaire. He was wealthier than Brent, Chloe, and Vivian combined. He knew exactly how toxic and greedy our mother was. He knew Brent was a predator waiting to strike, so he played the fool. He let them mock him. He let them steal the decoy pennies so they would never come looking for the actual gold. Maya covered her mouth with both hands, a silent sob racking her shoulders as she looked down at the documents. Michael had orchestrated his own financial disappearance to protect the two people he actually loved. I turned to the final, thickest packet of papers in the box, the legal trust framework. Michael had taken the entire $50 million and locked it inside an ironclad, impenetrable, blind trust. It was a financial fortress. Vivian couldn't touch it. Brent couldn't sue for it. Chloe couldn't even perceive it. The sole uncontested beneficiary of the $50 million fund was Leo. But a minor cannot control a trust. A blind trust requires an executor, a trustee who holds the ultimate discretionary power to manage the assets, distribute the wealth, and legally crush anyone who attempts to challenge the estate. I flipped to the final page, looking for the name of the corporate lawyer Michael had hired to manage the empire. There was no lawyer listed. The designated trustee, the person granted absolute dictatorial financial control over the $50 million estate, was written in bold black ink, Emily Brooks. I stared at my own name on the page. My mother had spent her entire life trying to control me with a pitiful allowance and a fake platinum credit card. Brent had tried to destroy me by canceling my grocery money. They thought they held the power. They thought they owned the world. I slowly closed the leather folder. I looked at Maya, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. And then I looked at Leo, who was happily rolling his toy car across the mahogany table. I was no longer just a forensic accountant hunting down Brent's pathetic embezzlement schemes. I was the executrix of an empire. I officially held the financial life and death of the entire Brooks family right in the palm of my hand. The weekend passed in a blur of encrypted emails, secure bank transfers, and ruthless legal filings. As the sole trustee of the $50 million Michael Brooks Trust, I possessed the ultimate unchecked authority to execute the financial directives my brother had laid out. He had meticulously documented every cent Brent stole, every fraudulent charity write-off Chloe claimed, and every family account Vivian had manipulated. Michael had handed me the nuclear codes. All I had to do was turn the key. By exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the trap was fully set. The execution was flawless, silent, and absolute. At 9:15, Vivian Brooks sat in the VIP leather massage chair at Le Rêve, the most exclusive hair salon in Buckhead. She was surrounded by the wives of politicians and real estate moguls, sipping a complimentary mimosa while her stylists carefully applied expensive foil highlights to her hair. For Vivian, this salon was her throne room, a place to project her flawless wealth. "Excuse me, Mrs. Brooks," the salon manager whispered, stepping up to her chair with a deeply uncomfortable expression. He held her matte black titanium credit card between his fingers. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your service, but your card has been declined." Vivian froze. The soft chatter of the wealthy women in the adjacent chairs instantly ceased. They were all listening. Vivian let out a sharp, condescending scoff, her face flushing with immediate irritation. "Don't be ridiculous," Vivian snapped, snatching the card from his hand. "Your machine is obviously broken. Run it again. Or better yet, use this one." She dug into her designer purse and slapped a Platinum American Express card onto the tray. The manager nodded nervously and hurried away. 3 minutes later, he returned, his face pale. "Mrs. Brooks." And I ran the second card. It flashed a fraud alert, and the terminal instructed me to confiscate the plastic. "I'm afraid I can't process any transactions for you. The bank representative on the automated line stated your accounts are entirely frozen under a federal directive." Vivian's jaw dropped. The other women in the salon were outright staring now, their eyes wide with scandalous delight. Vivian grabbed her smartphone with trembling, foil-covered fingers and opened her private banking app. A bright red banner blared across the screen. "Account access revoked. Contact federal receivership." Her checking her savings, her church charity management funds, they all displayed a balance of 0. 10 miles away, Chloe was marching down the driveway of her gated suburban McMansion. She was wearing head-to-toe designer activewear, a massive pair of sunglasses shielding her eyes completely, ready to go to the bank and scream at a teller until they unfroze her gallery accounts. But as she rounded the corner of her perfectly manicured lawn, she stopped dead in her tracks. A heavy-duty tow truck was idling in her driveway. Two burly men in neon safety vests were actively attaching thick metal chains to the axles of her pristine, custom-ordered Porsche Cayenne. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Chloe shrieked, dropping her iced latte right onto the pavement. "Get your filthy hands off my car! Do you have any idea who my husband is? He will bury you!" The larger of the two men didn't even blink. He pulled a thick yellow legal document from his clipboard and shoved it toward her chest. "I don't care if your husband is the President of the United States, lady," the repo man said boredly. "The bank flagged this vehicle as collateral secured by illicit funds. The title has been seized pending a federal money laundering investigation. Step back or I'm calling the police to report you for interfering with a federal asset seizure." Chloe stood completely paralyzed on her driveway. Several of her elite, snooty neighbors had stepped out onto their porches, holding their morning coffees, openly watching the great Chloe Holden get her luxury car repossessed like a common criminal. She clutched the yellow document, her chest heaving with humiliated, terrified sobs. At that exact same moment, Brent Holden strode toward the towering glass entrance of his logistics company headquarters. He was sweating profusely, his tie yanked loose. He had spent the entire weekend ignoring calls from his offshore bankers, convinced his high-priced lawyers could swat away whatever federal nuisance I had triggered at the country club. He reached the secure glass doors and aggressively slapped his CEO keycard against the scanner. The light flashed solid red. A harsh buzzer sounded. Access denied. Brent cursed loudly, slapping the card against the scanner 3 more times. The doors remained locked. Inside the glass lobby, he could see his employees standing around in confused, panicked clusters. But what made his blood run completely cold was the sight of 3 men in dark suits standing directly behind the reception desk. They were wearing federal credentials around their necks. A security guard Brent had hired just 2 months prior stepped up to the glass doors, pushed them open a fraction of an inch, and looked at his former boss with absolute pity. "Mr. Holden," the guard said firmly, "I have strict orders from the federal compliance officers. You are permanently barred from the premises. Your corporate accounts are under federal receivership, and your servers have been seized for auditing. If you attempt to enter this building, you will be arrested for evidence tampering." Brent stumbled backward, the color entirely washing out of his face. He looked at the towering building he had built on a foundation of lies and stolen money and realized he no longer owned a single brick of it. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He had dozens of missed calls from Chloe and Vivian. 20 minutes later, the 3 of them converged in the parking lot of a strip mall coffee shop. Vivian had ripped the foils out of her own hair, leaving her blonde dye job looking streaked and chaotic. Chloe was hyperventilating, having been forced to take an Uber for the first time in her life. Brent was pacing back and forth, gripping the legal notices they had all received. "They all share the exact same signature block," Brent said, his voice cracking with panicked realization. "The asset freezes the car repossession, the corporate lockdown. They were all authorized by a single entity, the Michael Brooks Memorial Trust." Vivian snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes darting across the legal text. "Michael died with nothing," she hissed, her voice venomous. "How is a trust in his name freezing my bank accounts?" "It lists an executor," Chloe cried out, pointing a shaking finger at the bottom of the page. "Apex Financial Management, downtown Atlanta. They're the ones controlling the trust. They're the ones who filed the federal injunctions." Brent's arrogant instincts immediately flared back to life. He convinced himself this was just an aggressive corporate maneuver, a misunderstanding orchestrated by a faceless trust manager who didn't realize the power of the Holden family name. "Get in my car," Brent commanded, his chest puffing out with desperate, toxic entitlement. "We're going down to this management firm right now. We are going to walk into that office, threaten to sue them for defamation, and force whoever is running this pathetic trust to release our assets immediately. Nobody does this to us." They drove into the heart of downtown Atlanta like an invading army. They pulled up to the towering 60-story skyscraper that housed Apex Financial Management. They stormed through the revolving doors, ignoring the security's desk riding a wave of pure, unadulterated arrogance. They packed into the elevator, watching the numbers climb all the way to the 40th floor. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a massive, ultramodern reception area. Vivian marched straight past the stunned receptionist, throwing the glass security doors open and leading Brent and Chloe down the hallway toward the corner executive suite. The gold lettering on the heavy mahogany doors read, Chief Executive Trust Manager. Brent kicked the door open without knocking. "Listen to me very carefully," Brent barked, storming into the vast, sunlit office. "You have exactly 3 seconds to lift the illegal freezes on my company and my family's accounts before I have you thrown in federal prison for targeted financial harassment." The office was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Atlanta skyline. Behind a massive slab of polished marble that served as a desk, a high-backed leather executive chair was facing the windows, turned completely away from the door. At the sound of Brent's voice, the leather chair slowly began to swivel around. I sat comfortably in the center of the chair, dressed in a sharp, immaculate black power suit. I uncrossed my legs and took a slow, deliberate sip from the porcelain espresso cup in my hand. I lowered the cup to the saucer, letting the delicate clink echo in the dead silence of the room. I looked at the three of them, taking in their disheveled clothes, their panicked eyes, and their utter, profound shock. "Good morning, family," I said, a slow, razor-sharp smile spreading across my face. "Please take a seat. We have a lot of money to discuss." Vivian stared at me, her face cycling rapidly through shades of chalky white and mottled red. For a long-stretched moment, the sheer impossibility of the situation seemed to short-circuit her brain. Then the denial set in, violent and loud. She lunged forward, slamming her designer handbag onto my immaculate marble desk. "You psychotic, jealous little girl!" Vivian screamed, her voice shrill enough to rattle the floor-to-ceiling windows. She leaned over the marble surface, her eyes wide with a manufactured theatrical rage. "You think this is funny? You think you can just break into a financial management firm, sit in an executive chair, and pretend you have any power over us? I am calling the police right now. I am going to have you arrested for cyber terrorism. You hacked into their servers. You hijacked our bank accounts. You are a common criminal. Emily and I am going to make sure you are locked away for the rest of your miserable life." Chloe stood trembling near the heavy mahogany door, clutching her empty designer purse against her chest like a protective shield. She looked frantically between her mother and me, the reality of her repossessed Porsche and frozen gallery funds tearing away her usual arrogant facade. "Make her fix it, Mom," Chloe whimpered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Make her give my car back. My gallery is completely locked down. I have vendors calling me. I have artists threatening to sue. She has to fix this right now or I'm ruined." Brent ignored both of them. His survival instincts had kicked in, but they were entirely misguided. He paced the length of the expensive Persian rug, his chest heaving as he yanked his smartphone from his pocket. His thumbs aggressively jabbed at the screen. "I am not playing these childish games with a glorified bookkeeper," Brent snarled, pressing the phone to his ear. "I'm calling Harrison. We are going to bury you in so many lawsuits you won't see daylight until you're 80. You just committed federal wire fraud, Emily. Harrison will have a judge throw you in a holding cell before lunch. You messed with the wrong man." I leaned back in the high-backed leather chair, steepled my fingers, and watched them flail. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't exhibit a single ounce of anger. I let them exhaust their manic energy, watching them drown in the rising tide of their own inevitable destruction. The silence from my side of the desk was infuriating to them. It was a mirror reflecting their absolute lack of control. Brent pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen with a deep, furious scowl. The call had gone straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Pressing the phone back to his ear, his pacing growing more frantic, he waited. He cursed under his breath. He hung up and dialed a third time, pacing faster across the rug. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, letting the rich, dark flavor settle on my tongue. I gently placed the delicate porcelain cup back onto its matching saucer with a soft, final clink. "Your lawyer just filed his resignation this morning, Brent," I stated calmly. Brent froze mid-step. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty grip. He stared at me, the color rapidly draining from his face, leaving behind a sickly grayish pallor. I smiled, leaning forward to rest my forearms on the cool surface of the marble desk. "Harrison is a shark, but he's a smart shark," I continued, my voice carrying a terrifyingly even conversational tone. "I sent a courier to his office at 6 o'clock this morning with a beautifully bound portfolio. It contained the tracing numbers of the $80,000 you siphoned from Michael's company, the fraudulent invoices Chloe used to launder it through her art gallery, and the wire transfer logs showing the money landing in Vivian's offshore accounts. When Harrison saw the undeniable hard-coded digital trail, he realized defending you would result in his own disbarment. He dropped you as a client an hour ago. You are entirely alone." Vivian gasped, stepping back from the desk, as if the marble had suddenly burned her. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Mother," I said, shifting my gaze to the woman who had spent my entire existence making me feel infinitely small. "I remember a specific conversation we had at the country club 3 years ago. Do you recall it? You were drinking a mimosa, telling your wealthy friends that my profession was nothing but a lowly snooper. You called me a pathetic pencil pusher. You said I was a miserable woman who burrows through other people's trash because she lacks the talent and the pedigree to build anything of her own." Vivian swallowed hard. Her throat bobbed. She couldn't look me in the eye. "Guess what?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "This lowly, pathetic pencil pusher just legally locked down $50 million of Michael's hidden assets. I am the sole, unchallengeable executrix of the blind trust. I control every single penny Michael left behind. I control the funds you desperately need to maintain your fake hollow lifestyle." I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit jacket, and walked slowly around the desk. I stopped right in front of Brent, forcing him to look at me. The arrogant, condescending executive who had belittled me at family dinners for years was now visibly shaking. Sweat beaded on his forehead, rolling down his temples and soaking into the collar of his expensive dress shirt. "And as for that desperate, pathetic stunt you pulled in the parking garage last night," I whispered, my eyes locked onto Brent's terrified gaze. "That forged custody document you tried to use to steal Leo, the one with the fake notary seal?" Brent took a step backward, his breath coming in short, erratic gasps. "That document, along with a comprehensive forensic timeline of your embezzlement, is already sitting on the desk of the director of the FBI at the Atlanta branch," I said, delivering the final fatal blow. "I triggered the federal injunctions at midnight. They are coming for you, Brent. They are coming for your house, your accounts, and your freedom. You are going to federal prison." The silence that followed was absolute. The reality of the situation finally breached the thick walls of Brent's denial. He was not just broke, he was a wanted man. The sheer magnitude of his incoming ruin shattered his carefully constructed facade. The sophisticated, successful businessman vanished, replaced by a cornered, vicious animal. Brent began to sweat profusely. He ran his shaking hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a scapegoat, looking for anyone to absorb the blame for his catastrophic failure. He slowly turned his head to look at Chloe, who was weeping silently by the door. Then he looked at Vivian, his expression twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "This is your fault!" Brent roared, his voice cracking with panic and rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Vivian's face. "You brought me into this. You told me Michael was a loser. You told me his company was bleeding cash and that no one would notice a few missing invoices. You told me you had it all under control." "Brent?" Vivian stammered. Stepping back, her hands raised defensively. "Keep your voice down. We can figure this out. We can negotiate with Emily. We can make a deal." "Negotiate!" Brent screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "There is no negotiation." She gave the files to the feds. My life is over because I listened to a washed-up, greedy old woman who couldn't even afford her own hair appointments. "Brent!" Chloe cried out, stepping between her husband and her mother. "Stop it! You're scaring me. We're family. We have to stick together. We have to..." Family. Brent spat the words out as if it were poison. He turned his vitriol entirely onto Chloe, his eyes blazing with a vile, deeply ingrained bigotry that he had always kept hidden beneath his polished exterior. You think I ever wanted to be part of this pathetic, dysfunctional street trash family? I only married you because your mother promised me a fast track to wealth. I come from a real legacy. My family built this city. You people are nothing. You're uneducated, low-class garbage masquerading as high society. Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. The racist, classist venom pouring from her husband's mouth completely dismantled her reality. The man she thought loved her had just exposed his true repulsive nature. You manipulated me. Brent continued, his voice echoing through the suite, desperate to rewrite the narrative to absolve himself of guilt. You and your conniving mother dragged me down into the mud with you. You forced me to take that money to fund your ridiculous failing art gallery. You're a talentless hack, Chloe. You couldn't sell a painting to a blind man without my money propping you up. I am going to tell the federal agents everything. I am going to testify that you two masterminded the entire embezzlement scheme. I will turn state's evidence against both of you to save myself. Vivian's survival instinct flared entirely, superseding her maternal instincts. She lunged forward, slapping Brent hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the room. You spineless coward! Vivian shrieked, her face contorted with rage. You were the one stealing the money. You were the one who forged the custody document. I will swear under oath that you acted alone. I will throw you to the wolves before I let you drag me down. Chloe dropped to the floor, sobbing hysterically as her mother and her husband screamed vile threats at one another, violently tearing each other to shreds in their desperate bid for self-preservation. The illusion of their unified elite family was completely eradicated, replaced by a vicious, cannibalistic feeding frenzy. I walked back around to my side of the desk, comfortably taking my seat in the high-backed leather chair. I picked up my espresso cup and watched them destroy themselves, knowing the FBI was already on their way up the elevator. The FBI agents had arrived exactly 3 minutes after Brent stopped screaming. Watching him being hauled out of my executive suite in stainless steel handcuffs, weeping like an infant, was a highly satisfactory start to the week. Vivian and Chloe had fled the building the moment the agents flashed their badges, leaving Brent to take the initial fall. But I knew my mother. A woman like Vivian Brooks didn't simply accept defeat. When she was cornered, she retreated to her safest stronghold, a place where her fabricated image was still treated as gospel truth. By Sunday morning, Vivian had activated her final line of defense. The Heritage Fellowship was a sprawling, opulent megachurch in the wealthiest suburb of Atlanta. It was a place where designer suits and luxury cars were as common as hymnals. For over a decade, Vivian had reigned supreme over the church's elite social circles, serving as the untouchable chairwoman of the Global Charity Committee. Maya and I sat in the back of my car, parked across the street from the massive cathedral. I watched the live stream of the Sunday service on my iPad. Vivian was standing at the grand acrylic podium, clutching a microphone with trembling hands. She was dressed in a conservative, expensive black dress, playing the role of the devastated, persecuted matriarch to absolute perfection. Please, my brothers and sisters, I need your prayers this morning, Vivian sobbed, her voice echoing through the massive sanctuary and out of my tablet's speakers. My family is under attack. My oldest daughter, Emily, has lost her way. She has become consumed by greed and jealousy. She used her skills as an accountant to illegally freeze our bank accounts, stealing the inheritance my beloved late son Michael meant for our family. A collective gasp of sympathetic horror rippled through the congregation. Vivian wiped a carefully placed tear from her cheek. She is working with a manipulative woman, an addict who is trying to steal my grandson. Vivian continued, her voice hitching flawlessly. Emily has left me destitute, targeting my daughter Chloe and wrongfully accusing my son-in-law of terrible things. She is trying to destroy our good name. I ask that you stand with us. Do not let her poison this community. If you see her or this woman Maya, turn them away. Protect our church from this evil. I locked the iPad screen and tossed it onto the leather seat. I looked at Maya. She was pale, but her jaw was set with quiet determination. Are you ready to show them what real evil looks like? I asked. Maya nodded. Let's go to church. We walked through the towering double doors, just as the head pastor, a distinguished man named Pastor Miller, was placing a comforting hand on Vivian's shoulder, thanking her for her brave testimony. The sanctuary was packed with over 2,000 people. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft manufactured sniffling coming from my mother. I didn't sneak in. I pushed the heavy oak doors open with enough force that they banged loudly against the interior walls. Every head in the cavernous room snapped toward the back. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, the sharp click of my heels echoing against the polished marble floor. Maya walked right beside me. I carried a thick, leather-bound financial dossier in my right hand. The whispers started immediately, rushing through the pews like a sudden wind. The congregation recognized me from Vivian's tearful description. They glared at us with righteous indignation, ready to defend their beloved charity chairwoman. Vivian froze at the podium. Her fake tears instantly dried up. Her eyes went wide, darting toward the security ushers, standing at the edges of the room. "What is she doing here?" Vivian shrieked into the microphone, her voice shrill and panicked. "Pastor Miller, have her removed. She is trespassing. She is the one I just warned you about. Remove her immediately." Two burly ushers stepped into the aisle, blocking my path to the altar. I didn't break my stride. I stopped exactly 1 foot away from them, holding up my federal auditing badge. I am a senior forensic investigator, acting under the authority of a federal mandate. I stated, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. "If you lay a hand on me, you will be arrested for obstructing a federal inquiry. Step aside." The ushers looked at my badge, looked at Pastor Miller, and slowly backed away. I continued up the steps, walking directly onto the altar. Vivian scrambled backward, hiding behind the pastor. She looked like a cornered rat. "How dare you bring your toxic lies into the house of God, Emily?" Vivian hissed, trying to keep her voice low, but failing to realize the microphone on the podium was still picking up every word. "You have ruined Brent. You have ruined Chloe. You are not going to ruin me here." I ignored her entirely. I turned to Pastor Miller, a man who had always treated my mother with the utmost reverence. He looked deeply uncomfortable, caught between the sanctity of his service and the federal badge hanging from my lapel. "Pastor Miller," I said, my voice carrying a terrifying, icy calm that instantly silenced the murmurs of the 2,000 people watching us. "My mother just asked this congregation for prayers because she claims she is a victim of financial theft. She claims she is destitute." "She is a liar," Vivian screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Don't listen to a word she says." I held out the heavy, leather-bound dossier, pressing it directly into Pastor Miller's chest. He had no choice but to take it. "I'm not asking you to listen to me, Pastor," I said smoothly. "I'm asking you to look at the numbers. Because numbers, unlike my mother, do not cry fake tears. What you are holding is a comprehensive, certified forensic audit of the Heritage Fellowship Global Orphan and Widow Fund, the exact fund my mother has managed for the past 7 years. Pastor Miller frowned, looking down at the heavy document. Vivian let out a strangled, terrified gasp. She lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch the folder out of his hands, but I easily blocked her, catching her wrist and shoving her hand away. "Don't touch that evidence, Mother," I commanded sharply. Pastor Miller opened the dossier. The first page was a clear, highlighted summary graph. "As you will see on page 1, I continued ensuring my voice carried to the back rows of the silent church. The donations collected from this generous congregation were supposed to build schools in developing nations and fund local women's shelters. But over the last 3 years, exactly $2.4 million has vanished from the primary holding accounts." A loud murmur of shock rolled through the congregation. Several prominent board members sitting in the front rows suddenly sat up very straight. "That is impossible," Pastor Miller stammered, staring at the bank statements. "Vivian has submitted pristine financial reports every quarter." "She submitted forged reports," I corrected him, tapping the open page. "Look at the routing numbers, Pastor. My mother set up a network of blind LLC shell companies, giving them names that sounded like legitimate charities. Global Youth Initiative Shelter Foundation Trust. But if you track the actual wire transfers, the money never left the country for charity. Where did it go?" Pastor Miller asked, his voice trembling as he turned the page. I turned to look directly at Vivian. She was shaking so violently her knees were buckling. Page 4 shows $300,000 wired directly to a VIP account at a casino in Macau to cover Brent Holden's massive gambling debts. I stated the words, slicing through the sanctuary like a scalpel. Page 7 shows $500,000 funneled into Chloe Holden's failing art gallery to create fake sales and artificially inflate her success. And the remaining $1.6 million that was used to pay the mortgages on Vivian's vacation homes, her luxury car leases, and the very designer dress she is wearing to play the victim for you today. The church erupted. Out this church. The absolute silence was shattered by gasps of outrage, furious whispers, and shouts of disbelief. The wealthy patrons who had written massive checks to Vivian's charity committee were staring at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. The women who used to worship her social standing now looked at her as if she were a disease. "Lies, it's all lies," Vivian shrieked, tears ruining her makeup. She looked frantically out at the crowd, her hands raised in a desperate plea. "She hacked the bank. She fabricated these documents because she is jealous of me. She hates this family." "I did not fabricate certified federal bank records," I replied, my voice echoing above the outrage. "The same federal records that led the FBI to arrest Brent Holden in my office on Thursday morning. The same records that allowed me to legally freeze every single asset tied to your name. You are not a victim, Mother. You are a predator who stole from orphans to buy designer shoes." Pastor Miller snapped the dossier shut. His face was flushed red with righteous fury. He looked at Vivian, stepping away from her as if she were radioactive. "Vivian," he said, his voice booming over the church sound system, "step down from this altar immediately." Vivian froze. "Pastor, please, you know me." "I said step down," he thundered. "The church board will be reviewing these documents immediately, and we will be cooperating fully with federal authorities. Do not ever return to this sanctuary." Vivian stood completely paralyzed under the crushing weight of 2,000 furious stares. Her social empire, the only thing she truly valued in this world, had just been incinerated in front of a live audience. There was nowhere to hide. There was no one left to manipulate. I turned my back on her, linking my arm through Maya's once again. We walked back down the center aisle. This time, the congregation actively parted for us, clearing the way. As we reached the heavy oak doors, Vivian finally broke. She collapsed onto the marble steps of the altar, her manicured hands gripping her hair, as she let out a piercing, genuine scream of absolute defeat. The sound echoed off the stained glass windows, marking the total spectacular destruction of Vivian Brooks. The drive back to Buckhead was a suffocating vacuum of panic. Vivian gripped the steering wheel of her leased Range Rover so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. Beside her, Chloe was hyperventilating, smearing her expensive mascara across her cheeks with the back of her trembling hands. The humiliation at the church had been absolute. Vivian's phone resting in the cup holder was lighting up with rapid-fire notifications, angry texts from board members, notices of canceled club memberships, and venomous messages from the very women she had sipped champagne with just days prior. She ignored all of it. "We still have the estate," Vivian kept repeating, her voice a frantic, breathless chant. Her perfectly styled hair was now a chaotic mess. "We have the house. We have the physical assets. The banks can freeze the liquid cash, but they can't take our home without a drawn-out legal fight. We will sell the antique furniture. We will liquidate your gallery inventory, Chloe. We have millions tied up in physical property. We just need to get inside, lock the gates, and regroup." "I'll call a crisis management firm. We are not beaten yet." Chloe sobbed louder, clutching her ruined designer purse. "Brent is going to prison, Mom. He took everything. He ruined us." Vivian slammed her hand against the steering wheel. "Brent is a dead man to us. We cut him loose. We focus on the house. The house is our fortress." They turned onto the exclusive tree-lined street that housed the most expensive real estate in Atlanta. Vivian sped up, desperate for the safety of her sprawling 12-bedroom Tudor mansion. She pressed the remote to open the towering wrought iron gates guarding her driveway. The heavy metal doors swung open, but as the Range Rover surged forward, Vivian slammed hard on the brakes, throwing Chloe against her seatbelt. Parked directly in the center of the pristine circular driveway was a Fulton County Sheriff's cruiser. Standing next to the cruiser, leaning casually against the hood of my sleek black sedan, was me. I was flanked by 2 uniformed deputies and a burly man wearing a high-visibility vest holding a heavy clipboard. I held a thick manila folder in my hand, watching with mild amusement as Vivian and Chloe scrambled out of their vehicle. Vivian marched up the driveway, her previous panic temporarily overridden by a surge of pure territorial entitlement. This was her property. This was her domain. "Sheriff," Vivian barked, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "I want this woman removed from my property immediately. She has been stalking and harassing my family all morning. She is a criminal. Arrest her for trespassing right now." The older deputy, a man with a thick gray mustache and a completely unimpressed expression, didn't move toward me. Instead, he stepped in front of Vivian, holding up a heavy, calloused hand to stop her advance. "Mrs. Brooks," the deputy said, his voice flat and authoritative, "I am not here to arrest anyone for trespassing. I am here to execute a lawful eviction and secure the premises on behalf of the legal property owner." Vivian scoffed a harsh grating sound. "I am the legal property owner. My name is on the deed. This has been my home for 15 years. "Not anymore," I said, stepping forward. I held up the manila folder, opening it to reveal the heavily stamped legal documents inside. Vivian stared at the papers, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about? The mortgage was paid off a decade ago." "It was—" I agreed, my tone conversational and light, "until your wonderful, brilliant son-in-law decided his logistics company needed a massive influx of capital to cover the gaping holes created by his gross mismanagement. 2 years ago, Brent convinced you to transfer the deed of this estate into the Holden Family Holding Trust for tax purposes. You signed the paperwork without reading it, Vivian. You always hated reading the boring financial details." Chloe gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "No, Brent promised he was just protecting our assets." "He was leveraging them," I corrected her sharply. "Once the house was in the holding trust, Brent secretly took out 3 massive secondary mortgages against the equity of this property. He used this multi-million-dollar estate as collateral to secure high-interest loans to pay off his offshore gambling debts and keep his failing company afloat." Vivian shook her head violently, her hands gripping the sides of her head. "No, that's impossible. The bank would have notified me. They would have sent foreclosure warnings." "They did," I replied calmly. "They sent dozens of them. But Brent intercepted the mail. He routed all the financial correspondence to a dummy P.O. box. The bank officially initiated foreclosure proceedings on this estate 90 days ago. By Friday afternoon, the property was slated to go to public auction. You were going to be thrown out on the street by the end of the month anyway." Vivian staggered, literally swaying on her expensive heels. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and aged. She looked at the sprawling mansion, the manicured lawns, the towering oak trees, and realized the ground beneath her feet no longer belonged to her. But then a desperate, venomous spark ignited in her eyes. "If the bank took it," Vivian spat, trying to salvage one last shred of defiance, "then what are you doing here? If the bank owns it, you have no right to be on this driveway either." I smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp expression. "The bank doesn't own it, Mother. I do." Chloe let out a strangled, pathetic wail. I closed the folder and tapped the cover with my index finger. When I discovered Brent's catastrophic financial mess during my audit, I saw the foreclosure notices. I knew the bank was preparing to sell the debt for pennies on the dollar just to clear their ledgers, so I made them a better offer. Acting as the chief wealth manager and trustee for Leo's educational and lifestyle fund, I authorized the trust to purchase the defaulted debt directly from the bank. "You used my grandson's money to buy my house," Vivian whispered, her voice cracking with sheer disbelief. "I secured an appreciating physical asset to diversify my nephew's financial portfolio." I corrected her using the exact sterile corporate language Brent always favored. It was a highly lucrative investment. The Michael Brooks Memorial Trust is now the sole creditor holding the paper on this estate. I essentially bought your debt, Vivian, and as the legal creditor of a heavily defaulted loan, I immediately executed my right to seize the collateral. I gestured toward the burly man in the safety vest. The locksmith is already here to change the codes on the gates and replace the deadbolts on every single exterior door. The security system has been wiped and reprogrammed. You don't own a single blade of grass on this property. You are currently trespassing on an asset owned by the son of the brother you discarded." Chloe fell to the pavement. She didn't even care that she was ruining her designer dress on the hard concrete. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing with loud, ugly, heaving gasps. "My clothes, my jewelry, my life is in there. You can't do this to us. We have nowhere to go." Vivian stood completely paralyzed. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch who had ruled her social circles with an iron fist was entirely broken. The realization that she had been utterly outplayed, that she had been stripped of her wealth, her reputation, and now her physical sanctuary crushed the last remaining ounce of her pride. Slowly, painfully, Vivian's knees buckled. She dropped to the concrete driveway, landing right next to her sobbing daughter. The woman who had spent my entire life looking down her nose at me was now looking up at me from the pavement. "Emily, please." Vivian begged, the tears streaming down her face, entirely genuine this time. Her voice was a pathetic, shattered whimper. "I am your mother. You can't throw me out on the street. I have nothing left. The church turned against me. Brent ruined our accounts. Please, I'm begging you, don't take my home. Just let us stay. I will do whatever you want. Please show some mercy." I looked down at the woman who had made my childhood a living nightmare. I looked at the woman who had tried to steal an innocent child from his grieving mother just to secure a paycheck. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt nothing but the clean, cold satisfaction of absolute justice. I stepped closer, looking down at her tear-streaked face. "You have 48 hours to pack your bags," I said, my voice echoing like a judge delivering a final sentence. "Take your clothes and leave the keys. If you are still on this property by Tuesday morning, the sheriff will physically drag you off my driveway." 48 hours later, the heavy iron gates of the Buckhead estate slammed shut, locking Vivian and Chloe out of their own twisted fairy tale. They had been forced to pack whatever designer clothes they could carry into black trash bags under the cold, watchful eyes of armed private security. But parasites are incredibly resilient creatures. They always find a dark corner to scurry into when the lights are turned on. Brent had been out on federal bail for exactly 1 day. He had secretly liquidated Chloe's last remaining safe deposit box, pawning her grandmother's heirloom diamonds, just to pay the bail bondsman and keep himself out of a concrete holding cell. They were utterly destitute, stripped of their power, and staring down the barrel of federal prison sentences. A rational person would have surrendered. A rational person would have called a defense attorney and begged for a plea deal. But my family was entirely allergic to reality. Instead of accepting their defeat, they doubled down on their grandest illusion yet. They proceeded with the inaugural Michael Brooks Memorial Gala. The invitations had been sent out months ago to the wealthiest investors, politicians, and socialites in Atlanta. The venue was the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, booked and paid for back when Brent was still actively skimming from my brother's accounts. Vivian and Brent knew their reputations were currently hemorrhaging in elite circles, but they also knew that Atlanta high society loved a good tragedy. The gala was their final, desperate cash grab. They planned to use Michael's memory to launch a fake charitable investment fund, hoping to secure enough millions in the room that night to pay off their mounting legal fees and flee the country. They just needed one thing to make the illusion believable. They needed me to play along. My phone rang at exactly 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. The caller ID showed a restricted number. I answered it, letting the silence stretch until the person on the other end was forced to speak. "I know you're listening, Emily," Brent said. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual polished corporate arrogance. He sounded like a cornered animal, feral and erratic. "You should be speaking to your public defender, Brent," I replied coldly. "Every time you open your mouth, you add another wire fraud charge to your indictment." "Shut up and listen to me," he barked, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You think you hold all the cards because you control the trust. You think you're untouchable, but you have a massive blind spot. You care about people. You care about Maya. You care about that little bastard she gave birth to." "Do not speak about my nephew," I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'll do a lot more than speak about him," Brent sneered, regaining a fraction of his toxic confidence. I spent the last 24 hours calling in every favor I have left in this city. I have a package sitting on the passenger seat of my car right now. It contains fabricated medical records stating that Maya was heavily abusing prescription narcotics during her pregnancy with Leo. I have a sworn affidavit from 2 private physicians on my payroll ready to testify that she is an unfit, dangerous mother. My grip on the phone tightened. I stared out the window of my office, my jaw clenching. He was bluffing, but a bluff involving Child Protective Services was incredibly dangerous. The press won't care if the documents are forged, Emily, Brent continued, sensing my silence. Once I drop this package at the CPS office and leak copies to the local news stations, Maya's life will be destroyed. They will take Leo away from her before Monday morning. She'll spend the next 5 years fighting in family court just to get supervised visitation. I will drag her name through the mud until she breaks. What do you want? I asked. What do you want? Keeping my tone entirely flat. I want you at the St. Regis tonight, Brent demanded. I want you to walk into that ballroom and play the loving, supportive sister. I want you to stand at the podium, smile for the cameras, and tell the entire room that the FBI raid was a massive clerical error. You are going to tell those investors that our family is united, and then in front of everyone, you are going to sign a legal proxy document transferring full management of the Michael Brooks Trust back to Vivian. And if I refuse, then Maya loses her son, and I burn your entire world to the ground before I go to prison, Brent snapped. You have until 8 o'clock tonight. Wear something expensive. We have a lot of cameras waiting. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the darkened screen. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Brent thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought he had found my weakness. He fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. He thought he was playing a game of chess, but I had already set the entire board on fire. I turned around to face the center of the room. Maya was sitting on the plush sofa, gently rocking little Leo in her arms. She had heard the entire conversation on speakerphone. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with maternal terror. She clutched her son tightly against her chest. "Emily," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "Is he serious? Can he actually take Leo away from me?" I walked over to the sofa and knelt in front of her. I reached out gently, brushing a soft curl away from Leo's sleeping face. "Brent is a desperate man, bleeding out from a mortal wound," I said softly. "Desperate men tell desperate lies. He can't touch you, Maya. I have already secured the best family law attorneys in the state on retainer for you. They have preemptively blocked any filings made by Brent or Vivian. He has no power over you." "Then why didn't you tell him that?" She asked, confusion warring with the fear in her eyes. "Why did you let him think he was winning?" "Because arrogance makes people blind," I replied, standing back up. "Brent and Vivian want to throw a party. They want to put on a show for the city. They want me to step into their arena. I think it's time we gave them exactly what they asked for. But we're going to change the script." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 5 o'clock. We had 3 hours. "Go get ready, Maya," I commanded. "Wear the black velvet dress we bought last week. I'm going to call my stylist. We are going to a gala." At exactly 8:30 that evening, a massive crowd of Atlanta's wealthiest citizens milled about the grand ballroom of the St. Regis. The space was an obscene display of misdirected wealth. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in imported silk. Waiters in white tuxedos carried silver trays of champagne and caviar. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was a flawless illusion of prosperity. Vivian stood near the main entrance, dressed in a sparkling silver gown. She was draped in rented diamonds, smiling tightly as she greeted the arriving guests, desperately trying to ignore the whispers and side eyes from the people who had read about her church humiliation in the morning papers. Brent stood a few feet away, sweating profusely in a custom tuxedo, his eyes constantly darting toward the heavy mahogany doors waiting for my arrival. He needed his hostage to show up. The string quartet suddenly stopped playing. A heavy, expectant silence fell over the ballroom as the massive double doors were pulled open by the hotel staff. I didn't just walk into the room. I commanded it. I wore a floor-length, deep emerald green evening gown that clung perfectly to my frame, radiating absolute power and sophisticated danger. My hair was styled in sleek, immaculate waves. I wore no jewelry, needing no artificial sparkle to announce my presence. I was the storm entering the sanctuary. My right hand held the tiny, soft hand of my nephew Leo, who was dressed in a sharp little miniature tuxedo. And walking right beside me, holding Leo's other hand, was Maya. She looked breathtaking in elegant black velvet, her head held high, radiating the fierce, protective grace of a mother who knew she was untouchable. The flashbulbs of the hired photographers erupted like a violent thunderstorm, blinding white light bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. The entire ballroom turned to stare. The conversations instantly died, replaced by the collective intake of breath from 300 elite guests. I locked eyes with Brent across the expanse of the room. His smug, expectant expression completely evaporated. He looked at Maya, standing tall and unbroken, and then he looked at me. The realization slammed into him with the force of a freight train. He had threatened to destroy Maya if I didn't come alone and submit. Instead, I had brought the very woman he tried to blackmail, parading her directly into the center of Atlanta high society, holding the heir to the Brooks fortune. I smiled at Brent, a razor-thin, predatory expression. I gripped Leo's hand gently and began to walk forward, parting the sea of wealthy guests, like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. The sea of Atlanta's elite parted before us, a silent wave of silk diamonds and bewildered stares, yielding to the sheer gravity of our entrance. The string quartet had completely abandoned their instruments, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the grand ballroom. I kept my gaze locked dead ahead, ignoring the frantic whispers erupting from the tables. Beside me, Maya moved with the regal, untouchable grace of a queen, her grip firm and protective around little Leo's hand. Brent looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray under the brilliant crystal chandeliers. His desperate blackmail scheme, his final trump card, had just evaporated in front of 300 witnesses. He had threatened to destroy a terrified, isolated single mother, completely failing to realize that Maya was neither of those things anymore. She was family, and she was under my protection. But the sheer velocity of the disaster bearing down on Brent and Vivian forced them into a state of manic, terrifying denial. They were out of options, out of money, and out of time. The only thing they had left was the script they had written for this evening. If they stopped performing now, the illusion would shatter, and the federal agents circling their lives would move in for the kill. Brent practically scrambled onto the elevated stage at the far end of the ballroom, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Behind him, a massive projected photograph of my brother Michael smiled down at the crowd. The contrast between Michael's genuine, warm smile and the venomous predators standing below him made my stomach churn. Brent tapped the microphone, the harsh thud echoing through the cavernous space and forcing the murmuring crowd into a tense silence. He gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, his knuckles stark white, fighting to control his rapid breathing. "Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight," Brent began, his voice trembling before he forced it into a facsimile of his usual polished corporate baritone. "We are gathered here to honor a giant among men. Michael Brooks was not just my brother-in-law. He was my mentor, my partner, and my closest friend. Losing him tore a hole in the fabric of this family that we thought could never be repaired." Brent paused, bowing his head. He actually managed to squeeze a single pathetic tear from his eye. The sheer audacity of his performance was staggering. The man who had systematically drained Michael's company of millions, who had forged documents to steal an orphaned child for a payday, was now openly weeping on a stage, playing the devastated best friend. A collective sympathetic sigh rippled through the audience. They were buying it. They were wealthy, privileged, and entirely blind to the rot festering beneath the surface of my family's designer clothing. But out of that tragedy, we found a new purpose. Brent continued raising his head, his eyes scanning the crowd, but intentionally avoiding my gaze. Michael wanted to change the world, and tonight we are officially launching the Michael Brooks Memorial Venture Fund. a charitable investment initiative that will carry his vision forward, managed directly by the people who loved him most. Vivian glided onto the stage right on cue. She looked like a silver phantom, her face arranged in a mask of profound, beautiful sorrow. She placed a comforting hand on Brent's shoulder, taking the microphone from his sweating grip. "Thank you, Brent," Vivian said, her voice breathy and trembling with perfect theatrical emotion. "It has been a dark season for the Brooks family, but grief has a way of showing us what truly matters. It brings us back to our roots. It reminds us that no matter our differences, family must always stand united." She looked out across the room, projecting the image of a benevolent, forgiving matriarch. Then she turned her predatory gaze directly onto me. I was standing near the front row of tables, Maya and Leo safely positioned beside me. For a long time, my eldest daughter, Emily, and I have struggled to see eye to eye. Vivian announced, her voice carrying a note of rehearsed maternal heartbreak. She stepped away from the family business seeking her own path, but tragedy heals all wounds. Emily has returned to us tonight. She has realized that Michael's legacy belongs in the hands of the family that built it. The entire ballroom shifted their attention to me. Vivian was using the weight of 300 staring, expectant eyes to trap me. She was banking on my lifelong habit of shrinking away from public conflict. She thought the pressure of high society would force me into compliance, just as it always had when I was a teenager, being berated for not wearing the right dress or speaking with the right inflection. "Emily, darling, please come up here," Vivian coaxed, holding her free hand out toward me, her smile tight and desperate. "Come stand with your family. Come show everyone that we are whole again and help us officially transfer the management of Michael's trust back where it belongs." I didn't break eye contact with her. I gently squeezed Maya's arm, a silent promise that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then I stepped forward. I walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs and stepped onto the stage. The heat from the stage lights was intense, but I felt nothing but ice in my veins. Brent immediately stepped to the side, picking up a silver tray from a small table. Resting on the tray was a thick legal document and a heavy gold fountain pen. The proxy agreement, the legal surrender of $50 million. As I approached the center of the stage, Vivian stepped forward and threw her arms around me in a crushing, suffocating embrace. The audience applauded politely, witnessing what they believed was a beautiful moment of familial reconciliation. But the moment Vivian's arms wrapped around me, her demeanor violently shifted. The grieving mother vanished. The monster emerged. She leaned her head next to mine, pressing her lips right against my ear. Her manicured fingernails dug so deeply into my back that I could feel them bruising my skin through the thick emerald fabric of my gown. "You listen to me, you worthless little mistake!" Vivian hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, venomous rage that was completely masked from the smiling crowd. "You are going to pick up that pen, and you are going to sign that document right now. You think you won because you brought that street trash mother and her bastard child here tonight. You think that protects them." Vivian's grip tightened, her nails biting harder into my flesh. "I own the judges in this county, Emily. I own the politicians. If you do not sign that paper and give me back my money, I will personally guarantee that Maya is arrested for drug trafficking by tomorrow morning. I will plant the evidence myself. I will make sure that boy is thrown into the most miserable, abusive foster care facility in this state, and I will make sure Maya rots in a prison cell for the rest of her life. You will sign the paper, or I will wipe them off the face of the earth." She pulled back from the embrace, instantly slapping the benevolent, tearful smile back onto her face as she turned toward the audience. She gestured gracefully toward Brent, who stepped forward, holding out the silver tray with the proxy document and the gold pen. His hands were shaking so badly the pen rattled against the metal tray. I stood completely still. I looked at the legal document. I looked at the pen. I looked at Brent's terrified, sweating face, and then I looked at my mother. Her eyes were hard flat and completely devoid of human empathy. She was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the frightened little girl she had abused for decades to surrender to her power. I slowly reached my hand out toward the silver tray. Brent let out a shaky, massive sigh of relief, pushing the tray an inch closer. But my hand didn't go for the gold pen. I bypassed the tray entirely and reached over to Vivian. Before she could react, before she could even register the movement, I firmly wrapped my fingers around the microphone in her hand and pulled it away from her. Vivian gasped, stumbling back a step in shock. Brent froze the silver tray, lowering slightly. I turned my back on them and faced the ballroom. The polite applause faded into a confused, dead silence. I gripped the microphone, my heart beating in a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. I didn't look at the wealthy investors. I didn't look at the politicians. I looked up at the back wall of the ballroom, directly at the tinted glass window of the audio-visual control booth. I gave a single sharp nod. The technician in the elevated glass booth caught my signal. The crystal chandeliers dimmed to a soft, theater-like glow. The massive projector screen behind Vivian and Brent, which had been displaying the vibrant, smiling portrait of my late brother, flickered and abruptly went black. A hushed murmur washed over the ballroom. The wealthy patrons settled into their seats, lifting their champagne glasses, expecting a carefully curated, tear-jerking memorial video set to melancholic piano music. Instead, the screen flared to life with the harsh, sterile lighting of an intensive care unit. The footage was slightly grainy, but unmistakable. The camera angle was low, positioned from the corner shelf of the room, partially framed by the fuzzy brown ear of the stuffed teddy bear Michael had bought for his unborn son just weeks before his accident. Knowing his inner circle was closing in, my brother had hidden a motion-activated camera inside the toy before slipping into his final coma. On the massive screen, Michael lay motionless in the hospital bed. Tangled in a web of life support tubes, the ballroom went dead silent. Then Brent walked into the frame. On the stage, the real Brent spun around to face the screen. The silver tray slipped from his trembling hands, hitting the polished floor with a deafening crash. The legal documents and the gold fountain pen scattered across the stage. In the video, Brent didn't look like a grieving brother-in-law. He looked like a frantic thief. He pulled a thick stack of papers from his jacket and produced a black ink pad. The 300 guests in the ballroom gasped in collective horror as they watched Brent grab Michael's limp, unresponsive hand. Brent aggressively pressed Michael's thumb into the ink pad and then forced the dying man's fingerprint onto the signature line of the fabricated will. It was a grotesque, undeniable violation. Several women in the front row covered their mouths. Board members who had just written checks to Brent's fake charity stared at the screen with absolute revulsion. "Turn it off!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. She lunged toward the edge of the stage, waving her arms at the control booth. "Turn it off right now. That is altered. That is a fake." But the video continued playing. The hospital room door opened again, and Vivian stepped into the frame. The real Vivian froze her breath, catching in her throat. On the screen, my mother approached her dying son's bed. She did not weep. She did not stroke his forehead or whisper words of comfort. She simply reached down, lifted the heavy heirloom jade necklace from Michael's neck, unclasped it with practiced efficiency, and dropped it into her Birkin bag. She then checked her reflection in the hospital mirror, adjusted her hair, and walked out. The disgust radiating from the audience was palpable. The elite society of Atlanta, the people who valued loyalty and legacy above all else, were watching the ultimate betrayal play out in high definition. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice cut through the horrified silence of the ballroom, cold and absolute. "They aren't grieving Michael's death," I stated, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "They are only angry he died before leaving them the bank passwords." Vivian opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was instantly drowned out. From the street below, the unmistakable piercing wail of police sirens began to rise, multiplying in number and converging directly on the front doors of the St. Regis. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom burst open. It was not the hotel staff bringing the next course. A dozen federal agents and local police officers poured into the space, their badges flashing aggressively under the crystal chandeliers. The polite veneer of the gala shattered instantly into absolute chaos. Wealthy socialites screamed and scattered, dropping champagne flutes that shattered loudly against the polished marble floor. Brent didn't even hesitate. The moment the uniforms breached the threshold, he abandoned the podium, shoved a terrified waiter out of his way, and sprinted blindly for the service exit behind the stage. He made it exactly 3 steps into the kitchen corridor before 2 federal agents tackled him. They slammed him face first into a stainless steel prep counter, pinning him down and violently twisting his arms behind his back. Chloe, who had been watching the nightmare unfold from a front-row VIP table, suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed shock. A female agent approached her with handcuffs ready, reciting her Miranda rights. The horrific reality of the financial documents I had exposed earlier finally clicked in Chloe's mind. Brent hadn't just ruined her gallery. He had secretly forged her signature, making her the primary guarantor on a mountain of fraudulent offshore loans. Chloe lunged forward, her manicured hands curling into claws. She intercepted Brent as the agents hauled him back into the main ballroom, slapping him viciously across the face. Her heavy diamond rings left deep red scratches across his cheek. She shrieked like a wild animal, entirely unhinged in her couture gown, screaming that he had used her name and destroyed her life. The agent swiftly pinned her arms, snapping cold steel handcuffs around both of their wrists, parading the disgraced couple in front of the very high society they had tried to swindle. Vivian watched her empire evaporate in a matter of seconds. The hired photographers were still snapping pictures, their flashbulbs capturing the brutal arrest of her golden daughter and son-in-law. Stripped of all her defenses, her stolen money, and her fabricated image, Vivian completely crumbled. The proud, untouchable matriarch sank to her knees right there on the stage. She crawled to the edge, looking down at me, where I stood firmly next to Maya and Leo. The elite crowd watched in stunned, breathless fascination as Vivian Brooks sobbed a pathetic and wretched display of total defeat. "Emily, please!" Vivian wailed, her voice cracking as she reached a trembling hand toward me. "I'm sorry. I am your mother. You are my flesh and blood. Please tell them to stop. Please show some mercy." I looked down at her, my expression entirely devoid of sympathy. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. In her frantic panic, the clasp of her designer bag had spilled open, revealing the heavy jade necklace she had stripped from Michael's dying body. I reached into the bag, my fingers wrapping around the cool, smooth stone, and pulled it free. Vivian flinched, but did absolutely nothing to stop me. I turned to little Leo, who was safely held in Maya's arms, and gently draped the heirloom over his small shoulders, returning Michael's legacy to its rightful heir. Then I looked back down at the ruined woman weeping at my feet. "You are not my mother," I stated clearly, my voice cold and steady, ensuring the microphone picked up every single syllable. "You are simply the woman who gave birth to me, so you would have a convenient background prop for your perfect life. The show is over." The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers faded into a distant, muted memory, dissolving entirely into the soft, golden light of the present morning. The camera slowly pulls back, dollying out from a tight focus on my face. I am sitting in the center of my sunlit living room. The suffocating, manufactured grandeur of Vivian's world is completely gone, replaced by genuine, unpretentious warmth. Bright sunlight streams through the large bay windows, casting warm, geometric patterns across the hardwood floor. I look down at my lap. Resting there is the thick, heavy, leather-bound forensic audit ledger. It is the exact document that had systematically dismantled an empire built on lies and stolen money. I run my hand over the embossed cover one last time, feeling the rough texture of the leather. I let out a long, quiet breath, a physical release of decades of tension and control, and fold the ledger shut with a satisfying heavy thud. The sound of the heavy book closing is immediately replaced by the cheerful clinking of porcelain. Maya walks into the living room, her face glowing with a relaxed, genuine smile that reaches all the way to her eyes. She carries a wooden tray holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. She looks healthy, vibrant, and completely free from the crushing shadows of her past. She sets the tray down on the coffee table, but before she can even hand me a mug, a blur of motion bursts through the hallway. Leo barrels into the room, his little shoes slapping quickly against the floorboards. He is laughing a bright, uninhibited sound of pure childhood joy. He runs straight toward me and throws his small arms tightly around my leg, burying his face in my knee. I smile a real, unguarded smile and lean down to scoop him up into my lap. He giggles loudly, reaching up to playfully tug at my sleeve. Around his neck, the heavy jade pendant rests securely against his chest, a quiet promise of protection, an unbroken legacy. Maya sits down on the sofa next to us, leaning her head comfortably against my shoulder as she watches her son. I look at the two of them, the family I actively fought to save, and the absolute clarity of the journey settles over my mind. Some people may share your blood, but they only hover in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to suck the marrow straight from your bones. They will use the concept of kinship as a weapon demanding blind loyalty while offering nothing but deceit and manipulation in return. But true family is different. True family consists entirely of the people you consciously choose to protect at absolutely all costs, the people who see your worth without requiring you to perform for it. Michael knew that. He saw the predators circling his home, and he knew he needed someone who wouldn't flinch when the time came to fight back. He trusted me with the sword and the shield. He gave me the tools to protect the people who actually mattered in this world, and I simply nailed the coffin shut on their greed. The camera continues to pull backward, gliding smoothly away from the sofa. The frame widens, capturing the entire living room in a single continuous shot. Maya is laughing at a story Leo is trying to tell, and I am smiling down at the boy who saved my soul just as much as I saved his future. The warmth of the room fills the screen, a portrait of absolute peace and undeniable victory. The image holds on our shared, effortless laughter for one final perfect second. Then the screen cuts to pitch black.